We are recording. So the interpretation services are to promote a better understanding of the conference, but doesn't replace the original. No person or entity will take on responsibility for errors, omissions, or ambiguities in the interpretation provided during the conference. In the first session, we heard from Dr. Camargo about the cancer burden, risk factors, and challenges for research in Latin America. Next, Dr. Martinez presented rates, incidence of cancer in Hispanic and Native populations of the United States. Now, the doctor is Wisner gave us an idea of the situation of Cancer Institute in Latin America, and she also spoke about barriers. In the round table, we spoke about different things, biobanks, implementation of findings of clinical trials, and presentations in Latin America. We're going to understand more the SWOG initiative, which concentrates in Latin America. And we are going to listen from Joe Horn about the Hope Foundation, which is the philanthropic entity. Bettina, I have the honor to introduce Dr. Charles Blaine, who will speak about SWOG as a model of international trials. Dr. Blake is Professor of Medical Oncology of Cancer Institute of the University of Health and Sciences of Oregon, and he is the current president of SWOG Network for Cancer Research. He has developed a lot of studies. His PI of pivotal studies. Amongst them, he was the developer of imatinib that changed the natural history of disease. I'm going to welcome Dr. Charles Blank.
Thank you very much, and buenos dias. Let's put this down. Can you guys see these slides? Slides?
No, we
can't.
No. Okay, sorry, let's try it again. Now? I hope.
No. Oh, now it is. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'll put it on screenshot mode. Thank you again. It is truly an honor to be able to attend this meeting, even virtually. And as you heard, I'm going to talk about the SWOG Cancer Research Network, its place in the National Clinical Trials Network of the NCI, and our international efforts. This is just basically what I'm going to talk about. I'll give you background, organization and function of SWOG, and then of both the NCTN and our community program, the NCI Community Oncology Program, or NCOR. And I'll close with SWOG's future plans, including our plans for our Latin American members. So this just demonstrates who we are and what we do. We are a major part of the United States publicly funded cancer research infrastructure. We are one of 4 adult U.S. cooperative oncology research groups. The others, which you may have heard about, are ECOG and ACRIN. ACRIN is an imaging group. NRG, which is a former NSABP, the radiation group, RTOG, and the gynecology oncology group, GOG, and the large one, or the Alliance, which used to be the CALGB, but also incorporated ACOSOG, a surgical group, and the NCCTG, which is the Mayo Clinic group. We also host one of 7 research bases on the community side in the NCOR, and we exist to design and conduct multi-institution cancer trials, but we do many other types of studies as well, data trials, secondary analyses, etc. Our mission is to significantly improve lives through cancer clinical trials and translational research. It's simple, but I hope elegant. SWOG has formal guiding principles that were voted into existence a few years ago. Patients remain our absolute highest priority. Science drives our research, not just trial and error. We embrace and encourage diversity in leadership, but also in membership. We demand integrity, accountability, and ethical behavior in our research. And very, very important to my group, we foster and mentor young and junior investigators to ensure excellent clinical research for generations going forward. We have a very large membership, a network of more than 1,200 sites, including 35 NCI designated cancer centers that get specialized funding from the National Cancer Institute, 17 lead academic participating sites or LAPs, 27 SPORs or specialized programs of research excellence, and we have a lot of international collaborations, both in Canada, of course, in Latin America, and in places like Saudi Arabia. We have more than 13,000 members, split roughly evenly between researchers and clinicians, as well as research nurses, CRAs, pharmacists, and we have the largest patient advocate corps in the NCTN. We've been around for more than 6 decades, and I think we've had a very nice impact. We have opened more than 1,300 trials. We have enrolled roughly 1/4 million patients. Our studies have led to approval of at least 15 drugs through the Food and Drug Administration of the United States, and 2 drugs have come off market because of safety or efficacy concerns. We have changed standard of care at least 100 times in addition to what I just told you. Our biobank has almost 1 million annotated samples. And again, our database has 64 years of trial information to be correlated for those secondary analyses. Joe Unger is a statistician up in Seattle, and he did an analysis showing that SWOG trials, if the results were implemented, has saved more than 3 million years of life. It's an incredibly frugal venture as well, not $70,000 per life year or $50,000 per life year, but a mere $125 per life year saved. Joe is actually going to be doing the same analysis for the entire NCTN, incorporating research findings from the other groups that we talked about on slide number 3. We are divided roughly in half on what used to be called the treatment side, but is now the NCTN side. You can see we have committees representing the common solid tumors, such as breast cancer, GI malignancies, GU, et cetera. We have the liquid tumors, such as leukemia, lymphoma, and myeloma. Myeloma. We also have some catch-all categories, such as rare cancers. And recently, we have just sponsored 2 working groups, one in central nervous system tumors and one in sarcoma, that funding allowing and successful in terms of running their trials will be made into full committees later. On the population science or NCORE science, we have committees in cancer care delivery, palliative and end-of-life care, our newest committee on this side, prevention and epidemiology, symptom control, quality of life, and survivorship. Very, very important to our SWOG mission. SWOG also has what we call research support committees. These do not primarily run trials, but contribute to the committees you saw on the previous slide. I'll just highlight a couple of them. We have a very active adolescent and young adult committee. We have a very active digital engagement committee. We have other modalities represented, such as radiation oncology and surgery. And we have some of the other non-physicians represented through things like oncology research professionals and pharmaceutical sciences. Recruitment and retention is again dedicated to promoting diversity in leadership, membership, and accrual to our trials. And as I mentioned, we have the largest patient advocacy corps in the NCTN. We disseminate our trial results through publications, and you can see we have somewhere around 90 or so manuscripts published every year. We have many more abstracts and presentations. We're fairly widespread throughout the continental United States. We have good representation everywhere, but this area in the central, which is pretty much controlled through the NCCTG, or what was the NCCTG and the Mayo Group. Nonetheless, it is possible for patients throughout the United States to go onto a SWOG or other NCTN trial. Our leadership is very well distributed as well, and we are very well connected electronically. As I mentioned previously, our statistical center is up in Seattle. Our deputy chair sits down in California. Our operations office is run through San Antonio. And Texas also holds our vice chair for translational medicine, Dr. Lee Ellis. Our clinical trials partnership vice chair sits in Chicago, Illinois at Loyola University. The Hope Foundation, which you're about to hear more about, is in Michigan. And the vice chair of the population side, Dawn Hirschman, is in Columbia University in New York. Registrations were actually predicted to go down a few years ago when the NCI consolidated, but that didn't really happen to a market level. You can see here in blue, the therapeutic interventions or accruals have stayed very steady from 2012 through 2018. This just shows where our accrual comes from. The overwhelming majority come from the community, but a good chunk come from LAPS or other academic members. And obviously, I'm hoping that our international accruals will increase over the next few years. Now, we get many millions of dollars a year from the National Cancer Institute, but it is not sufficient. As again, you're going to hear in a few moments from President Joe Horn, we get a lot of money from our charitable arm, the Hope Foundation for Cancer Research. This just demonstrates a few of the many ventures, important ventures, that Hope helps us sponsor. They offer research fellowships to more than $300,000 per year, other research support and various grants at more than $1.5 million per year. Of course, the SLAI is well known to everybody here, projected to be funded at $171,000 or so in 2021. The Young Investigator Program is critical to our success through mentoring of young and junior investigators. As I talked about earlier, that's about $50,000 per year. We actively support our Veterans Administration programs, which are not as well funded federally anymore. And you can see that Hope gives us about $3 million a year, vitally needed funds for which we are extremely grateful. There are many other funding mechanisms that our researchers do successfully accrue to every single year. R01 or other NCTN grants, we have an excellent track record in. We're very good at getting supplemental industry funds for specialized testing, surveys, things like that. And the BISCLIC program, or Biomarker Imaging and Quality of Life Supplemental Funding Program, does support randomized phase 2 or 3 trials. It's usually put in supplemental to the parent grant, and we have gotten millions and millions of dollars through BISCLIC. Again, our operations office, Hope, all exist to help you, the investigators, accrue additional funds if they are necessary to run your trials. I talked a little bit before about the 1 million specimens we have in our biobank that is held at Nationwide Children's in the state of Ohio. Our SWOG core grants fund banking of samples from randomized 2 and phase 3 treatment trials with some cost for submission, standardized processing and banking, but they do not fund specialized processing or testing, and those funds have to be raised separately. Again, we do everything in our power if you have a brilliant TM idea to help you achieve that. Another way to support our trials is the Clinical Trials Partnerships, or CTP. Originally, this whole venture was formed in 2008 as a subsidiary of the Hope Foundation. It allows us to separate our federal and non-federal funds. It's led by SWOG member Dr. Kathy Albane, and it does provide a mechanism to do purely industry-supported trials that still have a strong scientific basis. We don't do this as much as the other NCTN groups, but we are trying to do something called preferred partnerships, where we have access to a very large portion of a pipeline of a pharma company, and they have access to our intellectual brain power. So I think that is going to change in the very near future. It's also a way to fund some of our Latin America trials. Switching hats for a second, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the NCTN and how we fit in. This all dates back to 1912, when Congress established the United States Public Health Service. In 1937, they actually established the National Cancer Institute within the PHS. And interestingly, the NIH, which you may have heard of, or National Institute of Health, is somewhat younger, formed in 1948. In 1953, Dr. James Holland began trials in acute leukemia at the National Cancer Institute. And a couple of years later, our Senate decided to establish a so-called cooperative system with 3 major groups: the Acute Leukemia Group A, which became the Children's Cancer Study Group; the Acute Leukemia Group B, which became the CALGB and eventually the Alliance; and the Eastern Solid Tumor Group, which became eventually ECOG-ACRIN, as I showed you on slide number 2 to 3. Now, publicly funded trials exist because commercial sponsors have very different goals. You can see that the primary goal for a commercial sponsor is to register a drug, and the primary goal of a group like SWOG is to optimize treatment. We both want to extend label when appropriate and benefit patients. The commercial sponsors, want to expand their market share, and we are primarily here to create new knowledge. The commercial sponsors want to create shareholder value, and we want to primarily improve public health. Needless to say, there's a lot of overlap between these two columns. There are many reasons why publicly funded research is vitally important. It's a way to study less expensive treatment options that are not going to be pursued by pharma, such as shorter periods of adjuvant therapy, such as we've seen recently in colon cancer. We are able to combine and compare drugs developed by different sponsors, which pharma companies don't like to do. We can study rare diseases, which are not financially lucrative, which again, pharma companies don't wish to pursue. We can address things like dosing or schedule. We can look at other modalities, such as radiation therapy in combination with drugs or novel surgical treatments. And we can, most importantly, perhaps, identify patient and tumor subsets that are likely to benefit from interventions. We're much more interested in population science, so we can look at things like screening and prevention, survivorship, palliative and end-of-life care, and quality of life issues. We are much more likely to publish important negative results, so those treatments do not continue in the community. We can look at things like cost and cost effectiveness. And finally, we provide gold standard data for registry studies, which are becoming more and more important in this modern era. This slide just shows the access through the NCORE or Community Oncology Program. You can see that nearly every state in the union is represented. And again, patients have ways to go onto trial, hopefully fairly easily, more easily in the era of telehealth. Sorry, I animated this by accident. Where are we going in the near future? Well, again, everybody here is familiar with our Latin America initiative. I'm proud to say that 2020 marks our 11th-year anniversary. I'm proud to say that we now have member sites in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Uruguay, and Chile. This has been a major part of our grant applications to the NCI, and it has been extraordinarily well received, even as the NCI cut down on international research in general. We have a foci and informing our research, the SWOG research, with results that are applicable to the US Latinx population. Of course, we want to support research in Latin America itself, and I think we still share a goal of ultimately developing a dedicated Latin American network. Where else are we going? We want to increase our translational research, and one way to do this is to knock down some of our silos and increase communication between committees and committee-based translational medicine leadership. We are the only cooperative group that has two basic science centers as members, Cold Spring Harbor and Jackson Lab, and that allows us to do more effective translational science. Of course, we want to mentor future clinical trial leaders, as we've talked about multiple times during this lecture, and we're getting more and more involved with basket trials such as Immunomatch, the Master Lung Protocol, and MyeloMatch, a leukemia trial. We want to build our new committee, the Palliative and End-of-Life Care Committee, and it has several protocols that are going through our activation process right now, as well as the two new working groups I mentioned earlier, CNS and sarcoma. And we did receive a fairly large NCORE grant to look at very exciting topics like financial toxicity, how to use science to detect early recurrence, reducing late effects of treatment, and very importantly, improving communication between medical teams and patients and caregivers, perhaps through text messaging or other interventions. Where are we going in our operations center? We want to increase diversity in leadership, membership, and accrual. And again, we have a committee dedicating to help us do this. We want to improve and make more efficient many of our NCTN processes, such as coverage analysis, where we have to pay for parts of studies such as CT scans or PET. We want to improve the auditing process and perhaps do it centrally. And finally, we want a plain language writer who can take our protocols, et cetera, and put them in language that the average patient will understand and perhaps have a higher interest in participating in the trial as a result. We have something called Team Science, which is a way to integrate our patient advocates across the entire life cycle of the trial, not just at the end when we ask patient advocates, would a patient want to go on study? We want to involve them much earlier. And finally, we want to expand our protocol staff, grants and contracting, legal and stats, just to make our processes faster and more efficient. What have we done in 2020? Despite the COVID pandemic, we were able to launch 10 studies, and our accrual, which dipped, of course, when COVID first hit, is now back to pre-COVID levels. We did have to do what we're doing here today, hold our meetings virtually, but we had more than 40 sessions and more than 1,000 registrants for the fall session. We welcomed 7 new patient advocates, 7 out of 29 are persons of color. We were able to have 31 presentations at ASCO 20. We made 5 at the recent ASCO Quality Care Symposium. We just hired an IT specialist to use data to improve our process and decisions. And as I talked about a little bit earlier, we are trying to prepare a plain language summary of open studies for SWOG.org. With that, I will close, hopefully successfully stop sharing, and thank you so much for your attention.
Okay. Muchas gracias por su presentación sobre la infraestructura y
Thank you for your presentation about the infrastructure and the information about SWOG. Now, we're going to listen to Dr. Alejandro Mojar, the current Director of the Coordinating Commission of National Institutes of Health and Hospitals of High Specialty in Mexico. He was the General Director of the National Program Against Cancer in Mexico. From 2003 to 2013, he was the General Director of the National Institute of Cancerology in Mexico. He's a pathologist, surgical pathologist, and PhD in epidemiology by the Public Health School in Harvard. I should highlight he is the executive official of Southwestern Oncology Group, SWOG, for International Affairs. Welcome, Dr. Mojar.
Thank you very much. While we correct the screen, I would like to invite the participants to ask their questions under the tab Q&A, questions and answers icon.
Gracias por la invitación nuevamente.
Thank you for the invitation once again, and thank you all for being here. What I will do in this presentation is speak about 3 big chapters: a brief history of SWOG in Latin America, which have been the progress made in this effort that, as Dr. Blanqui mentioned, we've been working for over 10 years in this initiative, and which are the perspectives that I see based on today's session for the future, and in order to incorporate Latin America in this extraordinary effort of being active members of SWOG. Briefly, as mentioned by Dr. Blanqui, this initiative began in 2009, and it was in 2013 where 3 countries got together: Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. This was 2010 and 2013. And then, outstanding effort of SWOG, we initiated 3 very important workshops to understand the clinical trials and clinical research carried out in the United States. How could we combine that with Mexico? And we had 3 programs, one in Mexico City, one in Lima, Peru, and recently, last year, one in Colombia. As you all know, we were going to have a meeting in Chile, but due to infrastructure problems, due to the pandemic, we couldn't hold it. And I had the privilege that Dr. Blanqui appointed me in 2018 as executive officer for international affairs and to strengthen clinical research throughout SWOG, throughout Latin America. As pointed out, Chile and Uruguay, just like Colombia, Peru, and Mexico, we are active members of SWOG, and we're about to incorporate ACOG from Brazil. For those that are listening to us and that get in touch for the first time with SWOG, and through this panel of today, I hope that things will become clearer. We have the leadership of Dr. Blanqui with a group that supports us to develop clinical research in Latin America. We shall hear the extraordinary economic, financial, intellectual support from the Hope Foundation for the development of these initiatives, and of course, the group of statisticians headed by Dr. John Crowley, who has been an enormous support for all of Latin America. And it is certainly thanks to him that after 3 attempts, we managed to hold this symposium in Chile through these means. The important thing of this process is that we have supported the leaders of Latin America working on oncology, that work with good clinical practices, that have public and social commitment and have the infrastructure to do research. The infrastructure in these 5 countries that I pointed out is that we have a principal investigator, a coordinator, a chief or assistant coordinator for clinical research, and obviously we have a big group of researchers, and this is where I would like to emphasize the importance of the participation of different researchers in these institutions. Within the group of potential protocols pointed out, we have hundreds of protocols regarding all the oncological subjects or areas. In this box in Spanish, I just want to thank the support of the local institutions that are distributed in the United States and elsewhere. San Antonio, by Darren Spars, that is where they lead us, which is a regulatory process, how we register, how are the local ethics committee working, how they help us identify and continue with the approval of different clinical protocols throughout Latin America. As I pointed out already, and from the beginning of the importance of Latin America to combine efforts with the United States, we know that there are 2 big elements. One, obviously, is a big oncologic worldwide problem. And in the United States, as we heard before, this big diversity of communities, where 20-25% of the community is Hispanic in the United States. So we have there an excellent model to understand what happened in the United States. And we have 600 million inhabitants in Latin America, representing the first and second, it represents the first and second cause of death. This moves us to integrate our efforts to do translational research, moves us to identify risk factors and also to take advantage of the opportunities of personalized therapies, working with Hispanic population, Anglo-Saxon population, African descendants, and all the ethnical range that exists throughout Latin America. An example of what we have achieved in the series of studies is this one, where we participated recently, a trial on the effectiveness, prospective comparative effectiveness trial for malignant bowel obstruction, where we participated actively and where you can see we participated with several patients, and somehow this indicates the potential that Latin America has. We've incorporated more than 500 patients in different trials, but this trial just concluded some weeks ago, where Mexico, Peru, and Colombia showed that through good clinical practices, they could participate in this type of effort. Thanks to this ongoing collaboration with SWOG, we have this range of work to include patients in Latin America. Colombia already included some patients. Mexico next week, we believe that we will start including patients, but they have been approved in other countries. This protocol that can start enrolling patients immediately. And what I would like to emphasize, and as pointed out by Dr. Blanky, there's an enormous diversity of protocols where we can participate, like lung genitourinary cancer with the SWOG group, or cooperative groups that have strategic alliances with SWOG, and patients where life quality is a core element, with questionnaires in Spanish validated for Hispanic populations. These are a series of protocols that I would just like to point out what they cover. We have a broad range of common tumors in Latin America, as we already heard from Dr. Constanza and Dr. Mercedes. Two examples that have been very useful. One is the case of Dr. Rusthoven, who kindly discussed with all Latin America, explained to us what this small cell lung cancer was all about, explain us what this trial was about, and we could exchange ideas and see the pros and cons to participate in this trial. Just like this other study for prostate cancer, which has been practically approved in several of the Latin American sites to start immediately this enrollment of patients. So summarizing, this is a series of studies where Mexico, Peru, and other countries of Latin America have shown interest and enrollment capacity. And also, as I pointed out, the possible participation approved already by different committees, where we will do follow-up for the active participation and enrollment of patients of Latin America for these trials. These are the new members that will about to be defined in Brazil. In Mexico, there's a second institution that is joining in, and this happens through a long process at the State Department of the United States, but after approved, we practically have full capacity to participate in SLI projects. Other sites that have expressed their interest, Dr. Blanky mentioned it, these are some of the countries where we have an enormous potential to join efforts, not only in Latin America, but also at a larger international scope through SWOG, trying to develop a global oncologic model through SWOG. These are some of the protocols where Korea, Saudi Arabia have shown interest, and which is the outlook for the next 2 decades. Well, Latin America has enormous challenges, especially today with this enormous impact of the pandemic in low-income and middle-income countries, where Latin America is a good example of that. We know today we are over 650 million people in Latin America. The estimation is that there are 1.4 million persons receiving the diagnosis of cancer a year in this region. Then in the next 2 decades, there will be an increase due to the risk factors and due to what we already observed and heard in this morning's conference. There will be an increase of 90% of this population. And yearly today, we have over 670,000 deaths due to cancer, and this represents an increase of 100%. Latin America, like the rest of the world, has these two dilemmas. The dilemma of an enormous demand for medical care for advanced stage patients, an enormous need of incorporating new therapies that will improve life quality and increase mm, the life expectancy, and the impact of prevention that also requires resources. So all of us who live in Latin America, we know that we're always struggling with budgets for primary prevention or secondary prevention, but we also need accurate diagnosis. We need access to treatment, to new drugs or treatments according to the new standards and practices. And there's a high percentage in Latin America of patients that will require palliative care. And that is where I see an enormous potential for trials in Latin America in palliative care, starting by a better access, the utilization of morphine, for instance. And as you could see, there's a whole committee in SWOG devoted to survival quality of life. But we also have the challenge, and was mentioned this morning, there are few oncologists in Latin America. There are few radiotherapy units in Latin America. And in general terms, except for some groups like those that work in the institutes today, there's little culture of working in an interdisciplinary way, and particularly access to new medications, to new drugs. To give you an idea, the radiotherapy per million units is 0.5 to 1.8, whereas in Europe and the United States, it's 6 to 8 units of radiotherapy per million inhabitants. Medical care in Latin America, oncologists generally, we have 2 shifts of work in different institutions, and evidently this produces burnout because you have to work in 2, 3 institutions at the same time. But I think that clinical research that SWOG can offer to us and this high quality of care, and that's what we have to emphasize, this effort to work with young researchers and this migration of SWOG to different parts of Latin America, even today online, to educate the next generation of oncologists. And as was pointed out today in SWOG, we have the opportunity of having investigators that go to the young investigators training in Seattle. We have the work with ASCO and ESMO, and what we have the opportunities that we have today, Congress, webinars in San Francisco, in Chicago, excellent quality, participate more, as was pointed out, in strengthening our network of biobanks, because we do have a network of biobanks in Latin America, and the 1 million samples almost in SWOG or specimens, and in this way dissect, understand better the genetics of cancer amongst these Hispanic groups that today, for whom today this is one of the main causes of death. Another of the big challenges that I have lived doing oncology is publications. Look at this enormous cascade of publications that SWOG has. This is where we can also strengthen our publication capacity in different journals. Which are the invitations for Latin America? A better mentorship, the time devoted to a manuscript, this very difficult balance between medical care and research for Latin America, and publications. They are our best means towards obtaining recognition and financing through a SWOG support to write in English. Traditionally, the journals point out when we send a manuscript that the English has to be improved before being considered, and SWOG offers us this opportunity now. And having space, cooperating with SWOG, we will have the options to publish in high impact journals. My first conclusions, what can we do now and in the future? Well, with this group of already approved protocols, what we can do is to enroll patients, to include patients, improve our teamwork, analyze feasibility of studies, and through funding, which is an extraordinary opportunity that Dr. Blanky has pointed out, it's difficult for the NCI to export national resources to the international field, but we have opportunities. And another thing is to generate local studies as we shall see this week, to generate our own identity of what we are our problems and be a part of this extraordinary network, and in that way generate our own knowledge for Latin America, and then emphasize this extraordinary and unique opportunity to continue with SWOG in Latin America, understand this bicultural challenge to strengthen clinical research, understanding the restrictions that Latin America has to do clinical research. Of course, this will be an instrument to obtain greater local funding, as pointed out already, and the magnificent opportunity of continuing with this training. The idea is that next year in March or April, you will be welcome to Mexico. If you cannot come, well, we will do it online, but we hope that we will be able to meet here in Mexico coming year, even though it doesn't look that probable due to the epidemic, but Latin America can contribute to a model of global oncology so much needed in poor, low-income countries or middle-income countries. And last but not least, thank you for this opportunity, and you have all my support to continue to enhance clinical research in Latin America.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro, por esta excelente.
Thank you, Alejandro, for this excellent presentation. Next, I want to introduce the next speaker, Joanna Horn, President and General Director of the Foundation of Hope for Cancer Research. Joe, since 2006, has led HOPE team to allocate resources strategically and identify new resources to fund the most innovative work of SWOG, amongst them the Latin American initiative that has had continuous support by HOPE. They offer competitive grants, educational opportunities, support to infrastructure for the members throughout the world, allocating annually $16 million. But of course, Jo will give us more details in her presentation.
Hi, everyone. One moment. Let me just get my slides up. I have no disclosures. Is everything sounding and looking okay?
Yep.
I presume so. Wonderful. Well, let me start with a huge thank you to CRAB and to Dr. Mueller and all of the team in SLAI. I think that this conference took 3 times as much planning as any other conference, because we quite literally had to plan it 3 times. So we appreciate the persistence, and obviously this is an incredibly important set of topics, and it's absolutely wonderful to be included. Although hard acts to follow, both Dr. Blanke and Dr. Mohar, but I'll do my best. The purposes of my talk, I hope to lay out a bit about the Hope Foundation for Cancer Research from 10,000 feet to talk about our mission. I would like to talk about early SLAI and the role of the Hope Foundation in supporting it. And then thirdly, I would like to cover probably everybody's favorite question, which is how to get money and where that money is. So the Hope Foundation for Cancer Research was established in 1993, and you've heard this across both Dr. Blanke and Mohar's talk, so I apologize for the redundancy. But we were created to add additional support to our publicly funded work. And as the reality in the United States, and I imagine it is a similar reality in your country, but the SWOG Cancer Research Network being publicly funded doesn't necessarily have all of the resources it actually needs to do its job. So that's where the Hope Foundation for Cancer Research can step in. And we look to do that through a number of ways. And just over the past, I would say 10 years, the modalities that we use to support SWOG have grown exponentially. We maybe had 3 or 4 programs for SWOG membership about 10 years ago. And now we are looking at over 20 programs offering financial support to SWOG institutions and SWOG members around the world. Those can take the form of early career fellowships, which are fellowships for individuals. Basically, it's offsetting salary support for individuals 0 to 7 years out from their fellowship. Mid-career awards, which is a bit later on, about 7 to 14 years out from oncology fellowship. Looking to engage those. In the United States, we've had difficulty getting federal money. There just isn't as much competitive money for grants. And so we noticed that our mid-career oncologists and other statistical researchers and clinicians were having trouble accessing those grants. So by providing support to investigators mid-career, we can keep them engaged in clinical research and address some of the problems that Dr. Mohar mentioned in Latin America, balancing that gentle line between clinical care and having time for research. We also provide research grants that can cover different types of clinical trial components or patient-reported outcomes, quality of life studies, or translational medicine. We've mentioned our large data bank and looking at secondary data analysis funding. We come through the Hope Foundation, as well as all of the funding you see for group meetings and conferences and training and patient advocate support, as well as technology needs. And finally, we set off to really integrate the resources for SWOG clinical trials partnerships, which Dr. Blanke mentioned earlier, is the industry funded side of SWOG. So that funding that comes from pharmacy companies as opposed to from public. Sometimes I think it's easier to just look at things in pictures, and let me realize that's probably better for you sharing my screen. On one hand, we try our best to manage very wisely and responsibly. 90% of every dollar that we receive as a donation directly funds research. So our administrative cost remains fairly low, and we are absolutely committed to the mission of spending as much as we can on cancer research. In the center here, 2.2 times the return on investment. So what that really means is that we fund smart grantees who are doing very impactful work. If we were to give somebody a grant for $100,000, we have shown through statistical analysis that when they turn around and get another $250,000 award as a result of the funding from Hope, we're not only improving their careers in their science, but we're also improving our own return on investment for grant giving. And then third, I think that it is noteworthy that the publications resulting from our grantees are cited 3 times more often than the average NIH-funded project. So really what that means is that our grantees are doing important work and it's being referenced and shared in high impact journals. And I think that's incredibly meaningful when we look across the spectrum of careers. And again, as Dr. Mohar was citing challenges in Latin America, this is where another place that Hope can look to help SLAI across these opportunities. So I will move through these slides a little bit more quickly because I think it's been shared by those before me, but the objective of SLAI, and we're saying that we started in 2009, but in my mind, our first meeting was 2008. We're looking at recruiting key institution and leadership within Latin America to become part of the SWOG network. We're looking at research trainings, not only for clinical researchers themselves, but for CRAs, inertias, and statisticians across Latin America. We're looking at organizing regional conferences with Latin America, and there are 2 types that I will talk about in a bit more detail in a moment. We're also looking, as has been mentioned, at identifying research opportunities for cancers that are particularly relevant to your regions. You know, it's been mentioned that stomach, liver, head and neck, and cervix cancers are much more prevalent in Latin America than they are in the United States. And then finally, I think the vision, and it's been the vision from the beginning, has really been to aid in the further development of a funded Latin American cancer cooperative research network that is autonomous and working in the region. Again, Dr. Mohar has moved through some of these trials, but early on, SWOG had some real seminal work kicking off the SLAI with Dr. Manuel Valdivieso, who is the PI of 2 studies looking at H. pylori vaccination and H. pylori infection and its correlation with water contamination in Peru. And this was initially what brought us down to the region. Dr. Valdivieso was the first, I think, executive officer for international work within SWOG. And he was really one of, along with Dr. Crowley and past chair Dr. Baker, to kick off SLAI in the region. As mentioned as well, you know, other pioneering trials, and these are trials that SWOG is running in the US that have become appropriate or able for SLAI to join. We've had trials in neck, in lung, non-small cell lung cancer, in comparative effectiveness work. Dr. Mohar just talked about S1316. The point, I think, of this is to show that there are trials, and we've learned from the trials that have not succeeded, to be honest, just as much as we have learned from the trials that have succeeded. And I think in the 10 years to date, one of the things that SLAI is starting to learn in terms of accessible trials is really how to make the science work and really how to make the protocols work for patients. You know, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of cultural impediment and frankly, government impediment in terms of how to get these trials off the ground. And I think we have certainly shown success in making headway. Part of the reason I think for this initiated with our training courses in Latin America, and these were run by CRAB, funded by HOPE. And the training courses were essentially early overviews into the work of SWOG, the work of cooperative groups, and was really an opportunity to train with statistical knowledge and to share work about SWOG. And we had one at Incan, Mexico in 2016, in Peru, also in 2016, and Bogota. And then we had a preliminary site visit to Uruguay in 2017. And then we moved towards wanting to move just from talking about education and infrastructure into something that was impactful. And the next step that CRAB spearheaded with HOPE funding was the SLAI research conferences. And these were opportunities to learn about SWOG, but also to have small groups where we can really begin to talk science and protocol and needs of the community scientifically and clinically to learn more about how we can actually activate trials and improve the cancer care for patients throughout Latin America. These conferences took place in Mexico. There was a second conference in Bogota, and then here we are talking now. So again, just to clarify, all of this learning has culminated in this really simple slide, which is that there are 3 types of studies at this point that we've identified are most successful through SLAI. The first is that PIs throughout Latin American SWOG sites can join trials that are activated in the US. The need there will be reimbursement for the standard of care arm in the US. The second type of trial would be to initiate projects in your region with support from SWOG. Quite obviously there, the need will be the source of funding. And then the third is to initiate SWOG trials. So if there are questions of particular relevance to both regions and both populations, it's quite possible to activate a trial that is funded by public funds of the NCTN. And now this is the money part, which I know is of interest. The foundation funds a variety of peer-reviewed competitive research opportunities. that could work to fund trials. We fund broader infrastructure, as I mentioned before, and we fund those fellowship programs. So just as an opportunity, the first thing I will tell you to do is to look at the hopefoundation.org. You can see the website here on my slide. I'm sure it can be shared throughout the conference. That's the most up-to-date real-time information about our funding. The RFPs or the requests for proposals are all listed there. However, the Coltman Fellowship is for early career investigators looking to have time protected. As Dr. Mohar was talking about, that's a critical need within Latin America, to work on SWOG research. We do an LOI process that's due January 15th of next year. As I mentioned, I talked a little bit already about the Career Engagement Awards. For those of you who may be 7 to 14 years out from your fellowship and have a long history or a history of cancer research and are looking to continue to protect that time and maybe now get involved with SWOG, that would be an opportunity. Also with an LOI due on January 15th. Impact Awards are $250,000 grants, which can be spent over 1 or 2 years. And they're really intended to have a novel idea, and we are not risk adverse. We understand that sometimes good ideas do not work out. The point is we really want to strive for impact, innovation, exciting scientific concepts. That, again, January 15th will be a busy day, but also the LOI is due then. And then, you know, I think one workshop that will be of greatest interest, and I would really be open to including as many individuals as possible in this, is the virtual grant writing workshop. This is a tool whereby we've got a cadre of leading SWOG researchers who can work one-on-one or in small groups, assisting earlier investigators in writing grants, and you know, or anyone who's new to writing specific proposals about cancer research protocols. We'll go through all of the different parts of the proposal. Ideally, you will have a project and a funder in mind. And this is an opportunity over the course of 6 to 8 weeks to really work on your proposal with oversight. And our funding rate for those is actually 80%, which is phenomenal. As mentioned, we also have money available for secondary data analysis projects. You know, we've got a deep, deep trove of SWOG data, 64 years worth of information, and creating new questions and finding new answers from the volunteers who have gone before us is a really important aspect that the foundation will continue to fund. And then finally, the SWOG Young Investigator Training Course. We've got a cohort, I'll talk through it in just a minute, coming up in December, but we always make room for at least one investigator from Latin America to join our course. And again, you know, Dr. Mohar had called out the need for mentorship, and this is what that program does. This program provides an opportunity for clinical researchers to come to the States when it is non-COVID time and work in one-on-one or in small teams to develop a protocol that could actually be activated within the group. And it's a great opportunity for networking. It's a great opportunity to learn more about statistical design. And it's a great opportunity to learn more about our group. And then finally, I would just recommend checking out the website, but there is a seed grant opportunity later in July, which is a pilot program for good ideas, $50,000 for a year.
4 minutes left.
So as I mentioned, young investigators, we've had a number you've seen from Latin America. I won't read all through their names because I just got the time gong, but it's a welcoming group. And I think we're really eager to be able to share this important mechanism with investigators throughout the SLAI project. This is our group coming up. The course is usually held face-to-face in September, but obviously COVID has enabled us to change things up and work on a hybrid virtual solution in December this year. And then finally, looking ahead to 2021, the Hope Foundation is looking to invest another $175,000 in SLAI. I think to date, we've funded about 1.3 million into the SLAI project and are eager to see where it goes. We're incredibly proud of the growth that we've seen and the consistent support from the leadership that has developed both in the region and with CRAB and the Statistical Center. So I think this picture actually was taken in Antigua, Guatemala in 2008. When we started SLAI, it was just sort of narrow vision, a little bit murky, but you know, it was a great idea and everybody was on board, but we weren't quite certain where it was going to go. And then flying out of Bogota in 2016, we sort of have this much more clear, expansive vision of our capacity and our impact if we can collaborate with SLAI. And I think that the horizon is much more visible and we're certainly making steady progress. So I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. You know, though we are happy to provide the funding, you can do the work, you certainly enable us to fulfill our mission. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Joe. We will now start the panel discussion and Dacia will give us some instructions.
Oops, sorry, I had a hard time getting off of mute. All right, so we should have about 30 minutes for the panel discussion. Please put your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Okay, Bettina, do you want to read the
here
first
we have the
question?
first question. Previously, we received a question from Brian Valcarcel. He wanted to know how to join SWOG. I think that Alejandro Mojar told us quite clearly how this process works. But also Charles Blenky answered via internet. So, and the next question we want to address is from Juliana Camargo. She asks the board if considering the high rates across LA, are prostate and breast cancers also from interest for HOPA Foundation? So could, I think that perhaps as it is for Joe, can you start? Then I would like to give the possibility to Charles and Alejandro also.
Yeah, I hate to ask you to do this, but there was a lot of feedback for me. Could you just repeat the question itself and I would be happy to answer? And did you lose sound?
Quizás fue porque hablaba en inglés.
I'll repeat the question. So the question was just about interest in prostate and breast cancers in Latin America, considering that they are high rates across the region. Is there interest from SWOG in investigating this in the region?
Yeah, I would certainly defer to Dr. Blanky in that regard because it's certainly more clinical. It looks like you're not having a vocal, Dr. Blanky. Maybe Dr. Mojar can save you.
Yeah, well, yes, in the meantime, thank you. Of course, perdón, por supuesto, y eso ha sido el tema.
Of course, and this has been a subject of enormous interest for us. Breast cancer, particularly in Latin America, we know that there are advanced stages of the disease. Adjuvancy is one of the most important things in Latin America. So of course, there is an interest for Latin America to make its own proposals to study breast cancer within SWOG and also prostate cancer. But something that is very important to understand, there is an enormous group of protocols proposed by SWOG to participate in breast cancer. Obviously, in the context of the United States, breast cancer in a broad spectrum are early lesions that we don't see that frequently in Mexico. Same thing with prostate cancer. But the opportunity is to generate our own Latin American project for advanced stages of prostate cancer, for breast cancer, to upload it to SWOG and then obtain the financing. The other one, as I have just presented, is a prostate cancer protocol, metastatic surgery versus radiotherapy in patients with prostate cancer, where also in Latin America we have the potential and we can participate. So the answer is yes. We just start to organize ourselves better, to have our own idea in Latin America, bring it to SWOG, and in parallel participate in the prostate and breast cancers, which are fantastic, most of them, where we can see the feasibility without having access to these complicated and expensive therapies for Latin America, but having the possibility of participating in our daily practice in this context of clinical research.
Dr. Plenky, do you want to give your input also to the question in general? What kind of diseases should we or can we present, or can we propose studies on?
Does not have sound, I believe.
I think Dr. Mohar's answer was very representative of what SWOG has interest in funding. Certainly active disease committees, as Dr. Blanky had mentioned, across many of the disease areas. And it's just a matter of correlating the patient populations where necessary, and when that's not possible, as Dr. Mohar mentioned, looking at a more targeted regional clinical trial and trying to figure out, honestly, we'd have to try to figure out financing at that point.
Okay, we have another question, like for perhaps from Dr. Crowley, reiterating the interest from somebody in Chile. How would they get involved, say through GOCHI, in participating in a SWOG trial?
Perhaps, I don't know, es que si quizás Alejandro, yo puedo también responder. Mejor Alejandro.
Maybe Alejandro can answer. Maybe Alejandro can answer. In Chile, we are already joining SWOG. Maybe Alejandro can answer. How can people participate?
So how could Chile participate in SWOG trials? That is for another participant. Besides the GOCHI group, other institution, that's what you mean? I think that basically we can answer that right now. The national coordination of SWOG in Chile is in GOCHI. GOCHI is a cooperative national group, so we can incorporate different centers. And the way how to have access to this is to get in touch with us, with GOCHI. All those who are participating here have been contacted by GOCHI Secretariat. So you can ask this question through GOCHI's Secretariat to check out how we can give a way forward to this interest. That I'm speaking about Chile here. Yes, and we have experience in incorporating institutions in Mexico, a neighboring internal medicine hospital that works with cancer patients, which also participate, and we have experience in Mexico in sort of leading them. So with the clinical research coordinator in Mexico, we communicate through email and we decide how we can guide them. There is an opportunity in the San Antonio office. You can help us a little bit more because we had made progress with Chile and Uruguay, but it seems we're lacking a document. I know that sometimes you need lots of documents. You've got to be patient because it's a State Department of the United States that will move resources out of the United States, and that's not easy. So you've got to be patient, but there's a lot of support from the Office of Dana Sparks and from Dr. Gabriela Mora. They have all the experience, they've had it for many years, and they know how to incorporate new institutions. So we are willing to help in that sense.
There is another interesting question to Dr. Blenky, which is about translational research that include basic sciences. What can you tell us about this? Basic science will be included in those projects?
Great. Unfortunately, I lost my translation when I lost my audio. May I have the question again?
The question is if basic science is incorporated into SWOG studies.
Yes, whenever we can. We want our trials to be guided by science and not empiricism, that is trial and error. We have a dedicated vice chair or vice president specifically for translational medicine. We have those million specimens in the biobank, and we are extraordinarily interested in using translational science to find subsets of patients that can more specifically benefit from treatment. So I would say we try and stick it into every single trial we open. We're not, of course, completely successful, but we are well on our way.
Que tenemos otra pregunta de Javier Retamales. ¿Han considerado
There is another question by Javier Retamales. Have you thought of trials with secondary data for data mining, and what type of studies would you like to use for secondary trials? Did you hear, Doctor?
Have you considered secondary studies for data mining, like tissues or like other like treatment images? And what kind of studies do you project for secondary data?
So the answer is a very strong yes. We are extraordinarily interested in secondary analyses. We used to primarily conduct fairly simple, if not large, clinical trials, but now we realize that those studies can yield additional results through additional analyses. And I'm happy to say that the Hope Foundation, which you just heard about, has actually sponsored financially our program in doing secondary analyses. Our statistical center in Seattle is incredibly interested. And finally, we do have those million specimens in our biobank correlated with 60 years of clinical trial data, and those can both be used to yield results. We do a variety of different types of secondary analyses, and anyone at this meeting who's interested in any format should contact me or Dr. Mohar.
So I have another question that I think that would be interesting to answer from Paulina Araya. She asked if SWOG is conducting trials in supportive care and what would be the priorities in access to screening, early diagnostic, and primary oncological treatment. But I think that I would like you to answer the question about supportive care, because SWOG has a very interesting portfolio in this kind of trials.
Agree. So supportive care trials can arise through a number of different committees on our population science side. We do have our newest committee, which is palliative and end-of-life care, that really tends to look at those trials. Any study in that area would have equal standing to a prevention or epidemiology study if it were rooted in a strong basis, basically. So yes, we're incredibly interested. The team that leads that committee is very, very strong. We have 2 physicians and a PhD nurse researcher who is incredibly well known, and they are already up and running with multiple protocols in that area.
Okay, question. What kind of SWOG trials are most appropriate in Latin America? Are there issues with paying for a US standard of care in the control group?
That's the key question of this seminar and of the whole Latin American initiative. But I'm sorry I switched to English, but so Dr. Blanqui could tell me, then I can go back to Spanish. But that's particularly what we are interested in doing. And what I would just want to emphasize, those researchers that are members of this institution, we can give you a kind of password to look at the roster of dozens of protocols that can be incorporated to Latin America. Entonces, en español es, la idea es inscribir a estos
The
investigadores.
idea is to register these researchers, to include them in the roster of SWOG, and from there to try to look for, well, it's hundreds of protocols where we can incorporate them, but also to be able to develop good ideas. There's a special way, and we will discuss that later on during the week, I'm sure, how Latin American researchers can propose an idea to SWOG. How can we help statistically? How do we see the feasibility? And then move that to the SWOG committee. So the answer is definitely yes.
Discussion and ideas to anybody that wants to participate within the SWOG infrastructure to come up with ideas from Latin America to the rest of the SWOG group.
Vamos a discutir este tema
We're going to discuss this topic about funding of control during the symposium. And I would like to invite those who are interested in palliative care that Dr. Krause will speak about that on Thursday. So please don't miss it.
Ahora, bueno, yo quería preguntar también una cosa.
I would like to ask about, well, in Latin America, most of research
Sponsor de la industria farmacéutica, ¿no?
is done, sponsored, or funded by the pharma industry. There is an important imbalance. Dr. Blanqui, Dr. Moore gave us a lot of arguments to take part in cooperative studies such as SWOG. I would like to ask, one of the aspects that I think is quite appealing is the possibility to participate in the creation, the development of a project. Joe showed how we can submit proposals and then discuss with the support of John Crowley. I thank his support in all of this.
¿Qué podemos decir a la gente
But
que
what
está en este
can
momento
we tell
trabajando
people who
básicamente
are
en estudios de la
working right
industria?
now in
¿Cuál
studies
es lo atractivo de poder
sponsored by the industry?
participar en el desarrollo de los proyectos?
Dasha, ¿le puedes traducir al doctor Blanqui y luego yo puedo dar una...
Maybe Dr. Blanqui can answer, and then...
I just want to ask you how, or that you can give us the information how the participants, the investigators participating in SWOG can give their actual input in the development of a trial. That's really, really very exciting, I think, and could be an argument for especially young investigators who are now engaged basically in industry-funded trial to get involved in the SWOG idea of collaboration and academic research.
So there are several ways. We have dedicated programs whose output is supposed to be a clinical trial developed through that program, such as the Young Investigator course. Now, needless to say, there aren't lots and lots and lots and lots of slots for that particular venue, but we do have people from Latin America every year participate in the program. Secondly, when ideas are in early development within one of my committees, take for example, genitourinary, if we had a prostate cancer idea, the concept is floated to the membership of that committee for further development and input. And so Dr. Mohar can talk about attendance at SWOG meetings, but that's a way to actively participate, again, on a fairly limited basis in the development. The gold standard would be if a member actually had an idea for a trial they wanted to develop and run themselves, it would be brought to the committee that would sponsor that protocol. And I think Dr. Mohar also has a separate program that sort of screens ideas from Latin America. Alejandro, would you like to discuss this further?
Aquí el punto de la relación con la industria farmacéutica.
The relationship with the pharma industry in Latin America is very complex because, as mentioned by Dr. Blanqui, they go towards registry, towards identification, towards the market, towards sales. So it has a different point of view, perspective. And that is what I believe is very attractive for Latin America, because here, as mentioned the other way around, 80% in Mexico is pharma industry, 20% are local efforts to generate this kind of work. So the idea is here is how we integrate into SWOG, how we participate in SWOG discussion committees. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we haven't had many of these meetings, although some online, but I have been in San Francisco and Chicago. Let us suppose the breast cancer committee that is very productive. 10 protocols, different protocols for breast cancer are presented, that is discussed, and we arrive to a consensus. What is it that we can do and what we cannot do? So Latin America, the idea is that it little by little participates in these committees, proposes what can be done there, and then would be financed by SWOG. Obviously, also medications from the industry, but it is a decision that pertains to SWOG. And what I have seen throughout many years of doing clinical research, SWOG offers a different chapter in the interaction with the pharma industry. There is a collaboration, but only a collaboration. There's not an appropriation of the trials.
Bueno, una pregunta de
A question.
Dr. Brian Valcarcel.
Dr.
Does
Brian
SWOG
Valcarce.
also perform epidemiological assessments of healthcare services and primary care?
That is a very interesting question. The simple answer is we have discussed doing so. We've actually put forward ideas specifically related to COVID that are non-oncologic. It's something I would definitely be interested in hearing more about. It won't be a major part of what we do, but I think we would be capable of doing so.
I agree.
Certainly as we... Go ahead, Alejandro. Sorry, please.
Oh, I totally agree, Charles. Estoy totalmente de acuerdo. It's an opportunity and we can pursue that, definitely.
I would just add some of the interventions that we look at, such as whether text messaging improves adherence to chemotherapy regimens, could be adapted to more primary care settings. And again, that's something we'd be interested in pursuing as well.
So I have another question, and I would like to ask Joe about the possibility for training for biostatisticians, perhaps through CRAB. I know that John is very engaged with training people. I don't know if if there are also training opportunities for this professionals that we really need in Latin America. We don't have that much like support from biostatisticians in Latin America.
Yeah, and I think that that has certainly been identified as a need near and dear to Dr. Crowley's heart from the very beginning of SLAI. And typically, during all of the conferences, we are attending with a host of statisticians from SWOG. And I know, I don't want to speak for John, I wish he was on this panel, but I will. I know that he would like to continue to meet that need and to make those opportunities available as they were requested or required or as the need was identified. And I think that's something that the Hope Foundation as well understands is really critical. If you're going to launch high quality clinical trials in a region, then it is impossible to do that without high quality statistical support. And you know, we aren't blind, and we understand that it takes all parts to create a clinical trial. And thankfully, we have 60 years of experience of doing it in the US. And I think that we would absolutely like to see that. Now, that is a vague answer to what was a very specific question, which is that I would say continue to attend throughout the symposium this week, and the breakout sessions on Friday will probably be more specifically informational in terms of finding biostatistical information from the experts that will be there. I would also encourage you to continue to look at the YITC and other training courses where we can make those opportunities available. And essentially talk to Dr. Mohar or other leadership at your institution and let them know that that is a need of the institution, and we can continue to work as we move forward with SLAI.
John, you're
Looks
now
like
a
we might have an
panelist.
opportunity.
Oh,
Exactly. I was going to say, thank you. Dr.
John, you
Crowley,
can speak.
you're on if you have a chance.
Yeah, I thought Joe was going to mention the John Crowley Award, which is
I was going to, but it seems so far off at this point as an opportunity.
it's a once yearly possibility for someone to visit Seattle, a statistician, for a month once COVID is over. We have our first awardee, who happens to be from Joe's institution there in Michigan, but it's an opportunity that's also available to junior to mid-career statisticians across Latin America. Secondarily, we're still involved in training courses. Dr. Moore mentioned the Mexico experience. There'll be a large biostatistical content to that event next spring. And as Joe was hinting, maybe there's a future for this.
The biostatistical, the John Crowley Fellowship, we are really honored. Congratulations to you, Dr. Crowley. It's a brand new award at Hope in honor of the exquisite and impactful work that John has done across SWOG. It won't be offered until 2022 at this point because we already have a candidate for 2021, but it is there in the wings.
There's one final question that was proposed by one of our panelists now, but I think it's important to understand, how does funding flow from SWOG to Latin American sites? And how much per patient recruited?
Well, ha sido complicado porque las instituciones
It has been complicated because Latin America institutions were not very regulated regarding receiving resources from the National Cancer Institute. But in the case of several of the institutes, we have research units where the resource arrives directly. Obviously, you have to sign a contract. Everything is overseen, but once you have the infrastructure in Latin America, it's relatively easy to receive these resources. I can tell you that in Mexico, we have received, I think that more than $100,000 for patient enrollment that has been reinvested. So the flow is very simple from the United States towards Latin America. What we have to create is the infrastructure, the systems in Latin America, transparency, control, regulation, but it's more on the responsibility on our side that on the side of the United States. Once the center that is enrolling the patient has been approved, if it complies with the criteria, then the resource flows very easily from SWOG to Latin America. That is our challenge, to see how we open up the room for those resources. And it is absolutely key that money coming from an academic institution to another academic institution. The amount varies. It's between $2,000 to $2,500. It's not the amounts that the pharma industry invests. This is money to support local clinical research for statistics, databases, drugs, etc. So I think that that's it. We've been experiencing that for over 10 years in Mexico. I would gladly later on discuss in detail the administrative issues to receive these resources in Latin America.
Thank you very much for the three panel members. Thank you for your future perspectives for researchers in Latin America. We're going to meet tomorrow at the same time at 4 p.m. Chile time. Have a nice rest of the day and see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow.